Global trade is once again on the brink of a major shift, and this time the stakes couldn't be higher. With the US threatening new tariffs on Chinese imports, all eyes are on Beijing's next move. Will China retaliate with its own economic weapons, possibly restricting exports of critical materials that the world depends on? The answer could reshape entire industries, from technology and semiconductors to electric vehicles and pharmaceuticals. As tensions between the world's two largest economies escalate, businesses, investors, and governments are bracing for what could be the most significant trade confrontation in years. The question now is not just whether China will respond, but how severe its retaliation will be, and what it means for the global economy. Global trade is once again at a crossroads as China and the United States find themselves locked in another economic standoff. The latest chapter in this ongoing rivalry was written when the US announced potential tariff hikes on Chinese imports, a move aimed at countering what Washington sees as unfair trade practices. In response, Beijing is weighing its own measures, including the possibility of export bans on critical materials, an action that could have major consequences for global industries. This isn't the first time trade tensions have flared between the world's two largest economies, but the stakes are higher than ever. With supply chains still recovering from past disruptions and markets reacting sharply to every policy shift, any drastic move by either side could send shockwaves through key industries, from technology and semiconductors to electric vehicles and pharmaceuticals. As the world watches closely, the key question remains: will China retaliate with export bans? And if so, what will the impact be on the global economy? The latest tariff threats from Washington are part of an ongoing effort to curb what the US sees as China's unfair trade practices, including state subsidies, intellectual property violations, and market manipulation. Over the years, tariffs have been a go-to strategy for the US in dealing with trade imbalances, but this new wave of potential levies suggests an even tougher stance. The Biden administration has been under increasing pressure to protect American industries from China's economic dominance. With manufacturing jobs at risk and concerns over supply chain security growing, Washington sees tariffs as a tool to shift production back to the US and reduce reliance on Chinese imports. The new tariffs could target a wide range of products, including electronics, steel, and clean energy components, industries where China has established itself as a global leader. China's likely response: export bans on critical materials. If China decides to escalate the situation, its most powerful countermeasure would be restricting exports of critical materials. This wouldn't just impact the US, it would send shockwaves across global markets. China dominates the supply of several essential raw materials, particularly those crucial to technology and manufacturing. By restricting exports of these resources, Beijing could create significant shortages, driving up prices and slowing down industries that rely on them. Some of the key areas where China holds leverage include: 1. Rare earth elements, REEs. China controls over 70% of the global supply of rare earth metals, which are used in everything from semiconductors and electric vehicle batteries to military equipment. A restriction on these exports would be a major blow to US defense and tech industries. 2. Lithium and cobalt. These materials are essential for battery production, particularly in electric vehicles and renewable energy storage. If China limits exports, American and European EV manufacturers could face severe supply chain disruptions. 3. Pharmaceutical ingredients. The US relies heavily on China for active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs. Any export ban could lead to drug shortages, affecting hospitals and consumers worldwide. 4. Advanced chip-making materials. With the semiconductor industry already strained due to supply chain issues, China restricting materials like silicon wafers and photolithography chemicals could slow down US chip production. The global impact, disrupted supply chains, and economic shockwaves. If China moves forward with export restrictions, the effects would be felt far beyond just the US. Every major economy, Europe, Japan, South Korea, and even China's own trade partners would experience disruptions. Here's how the global economy could react. Supply chain instability. Many industries, particularly tech and automotive, would face delays and shortages, forcing companies to scramble for alternative suppliers. Rising prices. A reduction in supply means higher costs for manufacturers, which would inevitably be passed on to consumers. Electronics, cars, and medical supplies could all see price hikes. Stock market volatility. What happens next? Diplomacy or escalation? The coming weeks will be crucial in determining whether the US and China can reach a diplomatic resolution or if the trade war escalates into something more disruptive. While negotiations and back-channel discussions are likely happening behind the scenes, neither side wants to appear weak. The US may push forward with tariffs but leave room for negotiations, hoping to pressure China into making concessions. China, on the other hand, could use the threat of export bans as leverage, warning that a trade war would hurt not just the US but global markets as well. With both economies heavily intertwined, an all-out trade war is in no one's best interest. However, if neither side is willing to back down, we could be heading toward one of the most significant economic confrontations in modern history. For now, businesses and consumers alike are left watching and waiting, hoping that cooler heads will prevail before the global economy pays the price. The US tariff threat, what's at stake? The US has long accused China of engaging in unfair trade practices, including intellectual property theft, state subsidies, and currency manipulation. In response, Washington has frequently used tariffs as a tool to pressure Beijing into compliance. The latest round of proposed tariffs targets a range of Chinese goods, with an emphasis on advanced technologies and manufacturing sectors. Historically, tariffs have had mixed results. While they can provide temporary relief for domestic producers, they often lead to higher costs for businesses and consumers. In previous trade wars, both sides have suffered economic slowdowns due to increased costs and market uncertainty. This time, with geopolitical tensions already heightened, the risk of escalation is even greater. China's possible response: export bans on critical materials. China, being a major supplier of essential raw materials and components, has several options for retaliation. One of the most significant would be imposing export bans on critical materials that the global economy relies on, particularly those needed for high-tech industries. Some of the key materials that China could restrict include: 1. Rare earth elements, REEs. China dominates the global supply of rare earth metals, which are crucial for manufacturing semiconductors, electric vehicle batteries, and military equipment. A restriction on these exports could severely impact industries in the US and other countries.